episode 102 of the Hot Water History Podcast. As you can see, I'm flying solo, except I am honored to have my guest tonight, who is Bernarda Salguero. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's right. Yeah.
And you're better known as yourself, but you're also the wife of Scott Scheller, who's been on the podcast. So
Yeah.
welcome, Bernarda. So happy to have you here.
Thank you very much, Gary. Thanks for inviting me.
So there are multiple reasons to have you on. The focus is going to be Javier Milei and what's going on in your native Argentina. We'll delve a little bit into what you're doing in New Hampshire, of course, a little bit, and why it's a fitting place that if you're Argentine and you want to flee to a really, well, what we might call place that loves freedom, or La Libertad, right? That you would go off to the Free State Project, and you're a Free Stater. But I have to admit, the sad thing is, as much as Charlie wanted to be with us, he had prior commitments. He teaches salsa dance class at elderly women's homes. He says they're a target-rich environment. I'm just kidding. He doesn't do that. But I don't know really where. But I'm happy to have you here. So first things first, tell me a little bit about yourself and what landed you in the States.
It's a very long story.
Okay.
As you've well said, I was born and raised in Argentina. I lived there until I was 17. I finished high school. And then I was offered the possibility to go and study abroad. I went to Austria for a year and then went back to Argentina. And I wanted to go to college there. Unfortunately, my family wasn't doing very well economically. My mom lost her business. It was a very difficult time for us. So I started looking for things to do. Going abroad had opened my mind completely, and I wanted to explore other areas. And I thought, why not go to the US and learn English? That's why I came here for initially. And I worked as an au pair. So that was 9 years ago.
Okay. And where were you born in Argentina? Where did you live?
In La Plata. I don't know
In
if
La
you're.
Plata.
Yes, it's the capital of the province of Buenos Aires.
Okay, wonderful. And how big is La Plata relative to Buenos Aires?
So it's much smaller. La Plata is about, including all the suburbs and smaller cities around it, it's about 1 million people.
Okay.
So it's not that small, but it's not nearly as big as Buenos Aires.
Yes. And so when you were an au pair here, how did you eventually meet Scott and end up in New Hampshire? I know a little bit of the background story, but I want the audience here too.
So I initially went to Florida. I was there for a few months. That was where my first family was located. Then I transferred. I found a second family that I liked better in Illinois. That's where my husband's originally from.
Yes, and that's where I'm from, Chicago. So we're Chicago here. Yeah.
I lived in Peoria, Illinois for about 3 years.
Okay.
So I met during that time.
And so you went from Florida and you really wanted cold, uncomfortable weather. So you went to Peoria, Illinois. And then you really wanted windier and maybe a little bit colder weather by going up to New Hampshire. So how was it when Scott proposed to you, not for matrimony, but to go and become a Free Stater? What was your reaction, and were you on board? Did you introduce the idea to him? How did that?
Well, it's an interesting story because the first time that we went out, back when obviously in Illinois, he started talking to me a lot about Argentina. He told me he wrote a paper in college about Argentina. And to be honest, I thought he Wikipedia something right before the date.
He's just trying to be all impressive too.
Right. Then I was impressed by how much he knew. He truly was interested. So I was trying to tell him all about, what I understood from a little bit of politics and economics of my country. And I happened to mention, which it's the case, my dad is an economist. He's a professor. He has a PhD in economics. So I told Scott that, and I think he fell in love with my dad. Then he decided to keep going and see me more.
That's great. And your dad's work, where did he teach in Argentina?
So in several different universities. Right now, he's teaching in Junín. It's one of the cities in Buenos Aires. He's also in, I should know better,
I put you on the spot, right?
He's also in La Plata. He's been teaching in La Plata, part-time in the Catholic college as well.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found a female's kryptonite there. You know how when for a male's kryptonite, especially a father, is when you go into a medical office or you sign the kids up for something and they ask their date of birth and you're put on the spot. You're like, oh man, what is that? And then your wife gets very angry with you. So I'll just remember that, citing the exact place where a woman's father is working. That's the weakness, perhaps. There you could. And we maybe we'll just maybe edit over this for Dad. Okay.
Yeah. Hopefully he won't understand this.
Okay. He's not an English speaker.
He does. Yeah.
Oh, he does. Okay. He
He
speaks.
works with that.
Speaks
Not
English.
perfectly, but he does a good job.
He can understand. Wonderful. I can guarantee you his English is better than my Spanish, as you'll shortly learn. So tell me about the disposition of the Argentine people as you've come to understand it toward the national economy, especially inflation, in the years leading up to Milei's ascent. Obviously, he's a figure and an economist himself. Did your dad know him in the economic academic circles?
They did. In fact, I found out that they were friends on Facebook.
Oh, really?
Yes, for a long time. So they do have, obviously, they're both Austrian economists. They have a lot of ideas that they share. My dad is more on the Hayek side. That's what says at least all the time. There's a lot of things that they don't have in common too. Milei is a little bit more radical than my dad is, I would say. But yes, there's many points in common that they have.
So would your dad describe himself more so as a Chicago schooler and a Hayekian? And
Yeah,
so therefore Milei, although Milei has come out and said politically in terms of sociology or his view of society, he's an anarcho-capitalist.
yeah.
However, more economically, he does lean more Hayekian. So maybe that's where your dad and him had a commonality.
Well, it's also, I think it's also about the persona of Milei is you either love him or it's a little bit difficult. Personally, I like him a lot.
Okay.
I think that's what gotten him so far. You know, maybe he had been a little bit more mellow, people wouldn't have paid attention as much as they did. But at the same time, I feel like for people that don't understand him, it could be a little bit scary. And I think that's something that he probably should work on a little too, you know, be more approachable. Personally, I like his image, but you know, I understand why other people may not.
Does he strike you as genuine? And what I mean by that is there was obviously an appeal given the economic situation, especially with hyperinflation bouts. And we're going to get into Victoria Villarruel in a moment, because I think her story is equally fascinating. And her history as the daughter of a general during the Dirty War and other struggles within Argentine history. But so he strikes you as genuine, because I have to say, I'm usually, as an anarchist myself and an anarcho-capitalist, I'm naturally skeptical of political leaders. And I think that's the only healthy disposition that you can have, is initial skepticism. However, I did see videos of, for example, recently he denationalized the Argentinian airliner, and then he flew essentially what amounted to coach on a commercial airline using his own money.
Yeah.
And and I think I'm a pretty good judge of character. I'm old. I'm older than you guys. So it takes a little while and trial and error, but when you encounter someone, and you can sort of sense when they're being genuine versus being fake and artificial. But you'd say that he's authentic.
I think so, yes. And I think he's very passionate about his beliefs. And I really like that. This is the first time that I truly feel like I'm represented in, you know, by someone, and I support him. There's some things that I don't agree with him necessarily, but for the most part, I really like him.
Now, as an expatriate from Argentina, you can still vote in the Argentine elections, correct?
I can.
And you did vote for Milei?
Well, I'm gonna say, well, I guess technically you can say it after, but I don't know if you've heard that by law in Argentina, you're not supposed to say who you vote for.
Oh, I didn't know that. So it's a perpetual Australian secret ballot.
No, I didn't vote this time, just
Okay.
because of paperwork and difficulties. I'm
Yeah.
a citizen, I don't have any problems, but I'm saying that it would have been difficult for me to vote, but I would have definitely voted for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Tell me a little bit where you depart from him. Where are your differences?
So I really would, and this is my personal opinion, I would try to leave religion out. I
Okay.
not necessarily like that he's on his spare time he can do whatever he wants, including religion and everything else, but I don't think that that needs to be brought up. Especially Argentina has been historically a Catholic country,
Hmm.
and the facts that he brings up stuff that just people don't understand and don't feel aligned with. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just that I would limit myself to do what
I
he's
see.
supposed to do there in politics.
Yeah. So, interesting to note, there were reports that he's very fascinated with Judaism, even though he's a practicing Catholic. And to the point where he even said he flirted with converting to Judaism.
Yeah.
I at least read that report. And then I read a separate piece that said his fascination is more of a historical and
Mhm.
cultural interest. And beyond that, there's a history of uh, especially when we're going to transition to Victoria Villarreal. Sorry for my pronunciation.
No,
The
it's,
two
it's
L's always
fine.
threw me off.
It's a difficult last name.
Yeah, especially the two V's, right?
Yeah.
So, but that in the history of Argentina, there was, especially with the more leftist governments,
Mhm.
that there was always connections between, for example, terrorist groups in the PLO in Palestine and Iran supplying leftist terrorist groups with weapons. And so there's kind of, as a result of that, your enemy of your enemy being a friend kind of thing, where there's a fascination among more what we might call right-leaning or uh, conservative elements within Argentina, particularly the military,
Mhm.
with Israel.
Mhm.
Have you heard of that? Does that sound correct? Because I'm getting kind of varied stories about that or information.
Um, Personally, I mean, I don't know much about the topic. Uh,
Hmm.
Again, I think that I I grew up Catholic. I'm from a country who says to be Catholic. Most people really don't practice a religion. It's
Right.
a paper. It's on the Constitution.
Hmm.
To be a Catholic country. Yeah, I don't think that involving in religion has much to do with you know. I
With
if
running the
I
state.
voted correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
and especially um. Well, I just don't want to get too much into that, but that's.
Oh no, that's all right. Well, and I should give you the background. Probably Scott told you too. Both Charlie and I are devout, more traditional Catholics.
Mhm.
But the funny thing is, both you and I share uh, a disposition regarding religion, and that is that the state should have absolutely nothing to do with it.
Right.
In fact, the state is the persecutor of faith. So as such, just keep it out. And in fact, if we could extinguish the state, we would allow for a free exercise of religion so as people could discern outside of compulsion or persecution
Mhm.
um, by secular authorities. So, and in fact, we often talk about how corrupting the influence of the state is on the church. And
Mhm.
whenever we have historical periods, could be the French Revolution, it could be periods within the Holy Roman Empire and Middle Ages, what have you. But even in our own day, how much the church is often directed by and corrupted as a result by the money flowing from places like Germany or Canada, which is essentially the church is an own subsidy of the national and provincial governments and really limits the free exercise of faith there.
Well, I heard, and it could be just a rumor, but I heard that Milei said that he's not gonna fund the church anymore because
Good.
now we've been paying for
Oh, wow.
free.
So there are state subsidies for the church.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Speaking of the church in Argentina, Milei has one of the things that most has attracted me to Milei and his outlook, his work as both an economist, which I'm fascinated by, but more so as he's assessing and diagnosing the problems of Argentina, is his open I would say rivalry, more so antagonism toward a pope that, let's just say, is an open communist, or at least is very much influenced by communists.
So, he was pretty brutal what he said. I think he ended up giving an apology because it was a little bit, he went too far.
He took the chainsaw to Pope Francis.
Yeah, I think it was, he apologized for, it was not diplomatic what he said.
Did you
I found it a little
happen
cool, but
to, oh, sorry, did you want to add to that?
no, I was just gonna say that, it was a little, I think it was a mistake. It was, yeah, it was too much.
Okay. Did you happen to see when he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson?
I did watch some of it, yeah.
It was in that interview where what brought that interview to mind was when you said, when we were assessing his authenticity or how genuine he is, how loyal he is to the philosophy of laissez-faire and free markets and anarcho-capitalism. When he was asked, to what limit are you Tucker asked him a question along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, to what limit are you willing to fight for liberty in Argentina? And he said, I will give my life for human freedom. How did you take that? Because that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like that question, first of all, is never asked of our American, that is, say, U.S. politicians, in a way, because I think we all know the answer. They're 100% sellouts. So the fact that he was so just focused on that question, and so without hesitation said, I'd give my life. What was your reaction when you heard that? Do you believe it?
I do believe he felt that.
Okay.
Whether he's gonna do it, I don't know. If he would actually do it, I don't know. I think at the moment when he said it, he did feel it. Yeah. I do believe that he strongly, he has very strong ideas that he lives by. Yeah. I'm very grateful to him that he's very brave, because we are now talking about libertarianism, and we hear a lot more here in the US, maybe not as much, or maybe I'm surrounded by libertarians, so I hear it a lot, but in Argentina, some of the things that he says just a few years ago were almost, they would look at you as if you were a criminal.
Yes.
I went back to visit in 2018, and my mind changed completely when I moved here. Even though I was pretty libertarian in a way, I could not conceive the idea of, for instance, education not being free. To me, that was right, that had to be provided. And I did not understand that in any other way. And then I went back to Argentina to visit one, and I was talking to a friend. I said, maybe we should consider privatizing education. And that was probably one of the worst mistakes, not because of what I regret what I said, it's just because it was not the right person, not the right time to say it. I feel like people don't see things a different way, and just how brave he was. I saw him one time going on a TV show and saying, first thing he said before hello anything else was, taxation is theft. I thought that was heroic.
Yeah. To what extent was, under the Kirchner regimes, was it essentially criminalized to bring up ideas of separation of, for example, maybe healthcare ought to be a free market arrangement, or that industries ought to be denationalized and privatized? How much was it considered almost so outlandish that it might border on criminal?
You mean, can you rephrase that? You mean criminal, of saying that you don't agree with it, or
Sure. Well, in other words, under like the Kirchner regimes, which are openly socialist and leftist,
yes,
was there a sense that one could, in the middle of Buenos Aires or in the middle of La Plata, or anywhere in Patagonia, even though it might be remote, that you would, if you voice something like all the mines, all the lithium mines, or all the silver mines ought to be privatized. Let's say you openly said that.
Yes.
Would you fear reprisal or retribution or from
What?
the government? Would you be censored? Um,
So they will claim that's not true, that you're free to say whatever you want.
mm,
That's not necessarily the case. But that happens here too. There are certain words and certain things that if you do say, you can lose your job, or you can, and so are you really free to say whatever you want?
mhm.
Um,
It's always qualified, unfortunately, right? So long as the state is around, correct?
mhm.
A la Hayek and Mises and all of our heroes, right? Who's your favorite libertarian thinker or anarcho-capitalist thinker?
Um,
Javier Milei. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know. I don't necessarily align with anyone in particular. I just like I I support freedom. I like don't hurt people, don't take their stuff.
Hmm.
I've learned like I said before, my dad is um pretty libertarian. I grew up that way, but I've learned a lot of things when I moved here, meeting tons of people from the Free State Project, very smart people.
Hmm.
They taught me a lot. Um, so I wouldn't necessarily pick one person. I think just the idea of freedom.
Yeah. Well, we were speaking about Victoria Villarruel, and tell me a little bit about because she has had a marked political career
Mhm,
in her own right,
mhm,
and her ascendancy has been more so through not, well, although she describes herself as a libertarian,
mhm,
or she's in that coalition with Milei.
mhm,
She's more been a very vocal defender of the actions of the military
mhm,
and defender of those who have been, from her perspective, persecuted and prosecuted from the Peronist all the way through to the Dirty War period.
mhm.
Can you tell me a little bit about what is the perception of Argentine and the Argentinian people toward Victoria Villarruel?
So, I mean, I can speak for myself. I like her a lot.
Mm,
She is, I consider her very brave, very educated, very well spoken. She's passionate about what she does. I think there is a confusion. People claim that she's defending something she's not. All she's saying, she wants to show the whole story, everything that happened, and show both sides of history and defend every victim of you know of the dictatorships and the other both sides were attacked and there's innocence everywhere. It's not she claims it's not one side was good and the other one was bad. It's everybody had some guilt and some innocence in it, and she's
yeah.
speaking for the people that were ignored all this time. Mm.
Yeah, and she's vilified for that, isn't she? In
Mhm,
the sense that she's being balanced and a scholar, although it's because of, in part, maybe because of her background, her father being a military man, and on the more on the right, that her work is considered therefore inherently biased, and it really is, as you're accounting. I have to admit I haven't read her work, and maybe I should as a historian, and I'm fascinated by that period. Um, and yet I have to plead ignorance there. So I'm relying on a little bit of what you said about her objectivity
yes.
and her professionalism as a scholar. And I have read that she actually has gone to the protests when they're, and she's honored the tomb or memorial of different military leaders who were killed in the wars.
So from 1976 through 1983 we had one of the worst and the last, we hope it's forever, the last dictatorship in Argentina.
Mhm.
Um, Many people disappear um, from, so the military. If we get this part, it would be great because I really don't want to get into this.
Oh, that's okay. Okay.
My mom grew up during that time,
Uh-huh.
and she really has. It's a very sensitive topic for her.
Okay.
Lots of
We could speak more generally about it if that's okay.
okay.
Just more of maybe, and you weren't born yet.
No, no, no,
No,
no. It was
but
from
your parents
75,
obviously lived through
95.
that.
Yes, yes. My mom, she remembers those time, and it was a very terrible time. People disappeared. It was people lived through fear. She still has those I wouldn't say
Those
trauma, but
memories.
those memories, yes.
Yeah.
It's
Do you feel as though she's, as a result of going through that, well, let's call it a terror, yeah,
Mhm.
when people are living on edge?
Mhm.
Was, by the way, who was the dictator at that time?
So we had several.
Hmm.
Videla is one of them. Viola. There's different about 5 or 6 different people that passed, and in between there was in 1982 happened the Falkland Islands War.
Hmm. Right,
Yeah.
right. And were those more leftist or right-leaning governments?
So those were dictatorships. And that's the thing that
They
there's
were
a
totalitarian.
correct, yeah, and
Yeah.
there's a big misunderstanding of people what they truly were. They took, if you ask me, I would say economically they were very lefties. They took tons of loans from the IMF and used that money however they thought they could use it and as they pleased.
Hmm.
Uh, Created a bunch of debt for the country.
Yeah.
At the same time, people would say, no, they were, they aligned with other countries, and that's what capitalism is, because they don't really understand what capitalism is, and they
Sure.
blame poverty on capitalism, but that's just
Yeah.
your ignorance.
Hmm. That, talking about your mom and the different generations experience within Argentina, when Milei was elected
Mhm,
in the States, I think you probably saw that there were a lot of videos or historical footage being shown of what Argentina looked like before Perón and before the 1945, the 50s dictatorships and the
mhm,
socialist governments. And it didn't surprise me because I learned Latin American history before, so I knew how wealthy and prosperous per capita Argentinians were. But Buenos Aires was the Paris of the South. It was the place to be, and it was really the prosperity was as a result of free enterprise and laissez-faire capitalism.
yeah.
So I was thinking, are your grandparents still alive?
Yes, they are.
Do
Yeah.
are they able to recollect, or maybe even stories of, and do they see that as a golden age of Argentina that is long in the past and can never come back? Or do they have hope? And I know I'm asking you generalities, but do they have hope in that generation that Malay might, albeit there's going to be some rough years and times ahead, who is it? Was it Rothbard or Hayek said, getting um, a country off of fiat and hyperinflation is like getting a heroin addict off of heroin. There's going to be a withdrawal. Um, so there might be tough days. But do they have any shred of hope or optimism that Malay might be able to reestablish that?
So I just wanted to clarify, Argentina was very wealthy up until the 1930s. Uh,
Hmm.
Before we were my country is full of immigrants. We had a ton of people that, before it was you were in Europe and you took a boat and went to either the United States or Argentina.
Right. Germans, Italians, Spanish, you
Mhm.
name it. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously 1930s hit us everybody. We had a bunch of dictatorships until the mid 40s, and that's when Perón came in.
Hmm.
Now, what you need to understand is Perón comes in as one of the first democratic government after a ton of years of authoritarianism. I'm sorry.
Yes, very good.
Okay, thanks. Um, and he came with ideas of, reforming laws for labor laws and votes for women. That was great. Um, but he also did he was pro-Nazi and pro-fascist, and he was
Hmm.
just very socialist, and
Yeah.
he just happened to be at the right time at the right place, and he became the biggest hero of Argentina. Even up until today, there's a ton of people that support him. That up until Milei, most candidates were always Peronist.
Mm.
So I forgot what I was saying.
Oh no, we were just commenting about whether your grandparents' generation sees that as a possibility of return for Argentina with Milei.
So I wouldn't speak for my grandparents. I think my grandparents were not as old, to
Yes.
see that they didn't necessarily live those golden ages.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, you know, like I said, it was up until 1930s and it started going downhill.
Yeah.
Um,
Or maybe they heard stories from their parents like, hey, this not this wasn't the way it always was.
correct. I think it's more the biggest support that Milei has is the youth.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the older people don't like him, they do. The problem is there's a lot of work to do, and it's going to take Milei a long time, you know, to recover the country. And these older people may not see it. And
Yeah.
maybe in their lifetime is unfortunate, but um, they do have, you know, the youth are they put a vote on Milei, hoping that the country will improve and um, we can have something better in the future. He's very realistic. He claims that he's not going to be overnight. It may
Right.
take years.
Which is refreshing in and of itself,
Yeah.
right? How
Mhm.
many times do you hear politicians say it's not going to be a revolution of the good immediately? So Dave, the comic Dave Smith, who's our in our camp, famous libertarian, once did a skit and he started riffing about how if the Department of the Interior in the United States or the Department of Commerce went away, and the times that we have had government shutdowns, and everyone's like, hey, we could still live and life keeps on going without the Department of Forestry or what have you, or housing and urban development. No one cares. And then some lady in the audience stood up and said, well, I care. And he goes, well, ma'am, why do you care? She goes, well, I work for the Department of the Interior. Yeah, of course, you care because you got a job. What's obvious when you are living here long enough, I think you could assert that this is true too, is that there is a clear regional or more so urban and rural divide in the United States,
Mhm.
right? Where in small town and rural America is very much still conservative, and then big city, especially blue city in the north and northeast and the west, is extraordinarily progressive. What's
Mhm.
fascinating to me is just what you said about the appeal Malay has, not even among the youth, is fascinating enough and interesting enough. But in fact, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, his greatest support came from the largest cities. Is that not the case?
Yes, but not Buenos Aires though.
Okay,
Yeah,
because
that
there's so many government
oh,
workers there.
correct. Yeah, and that was expected.
Hmm.
Same thing from La Plata.
Okay.
Most people that work there, I believe, if I'm not wrong, 70% of the population that work in La Plata work for the government.
So you're
So
from a government town, and
yes,
you still survived, Bernarda.
I did. Well, interestingly enough, my most of my circle of people that I know that I grew up with, that you know, many of them don't. Like I said, I sometimes don't feel comfortable talking openly because most of those people don't agree with me.
Okay. And is it because they're employed by the government or that their jobs depend on it in some way, in
Um,
a
yeah, yeah.
connected way?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, and in truth, I mean, it's understandable. It's it when you're under that type of statism for so long and it perpetuates itself, then it is a shock to the system to all of a sudden, as you were expecting, it's kind of like weird leftist regime uncertainty, that concept in economics. I'm sure your dad's written about it. Is like, well, how do you plan a life and a career, and then all of a sudden, regardless of whether it's parasitical and from the government or it's from the free market, yes, we would say it's better from the free market because you're responding to customer or consumer demand, and we have the profit loss test, and government doesn't do that, of course. But it is somewhat unfair. It's kind of like when when Biden came out with all of those student loan forgiveness plans,
Mhm.
and of course, a lot of people on our side was like, "That's even more theft. What are you doing?" But I don't know about you, but I had a kind of sympathetic view because if you've been duped for generations and since you were a little kid to believe that college is something that is not just a requirement and an essential to get a job or even just to be considered a success in life, and then as a result of the subsidies and the waste and the fraud and abuse and then the incredible cost of college, and you leave your undergraduate degree with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Is that really fair? Is that just? So I'm sympathetic to a lot of the young people. Seems like
Um,
Milei has tapped into that and like created a message that says we've been doing that for so long, it's not working for us anymore.
so this is, I understand what you're saying. I also think that I am sympathetic and I understand the people that were punished by that system, the very poor that had no, no option, and they really depend on that welfare they receive.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously those people need help to get out of that situation. In taking their what they receive now is not the solution. You don't have to go for that. You have to go for la casta, how he calls, the people that are above.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really bothers me, that the people that I know that are in that environment that support the system, and they're truly just, the only reason why is because they've been privileged by that. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that because they're a necessity. It's because they're comfortable and they don't want to get out of that.
And not just the comfortability of being in the system. Do you think that I think socialism, one of the greatest crimes that socialism perpetuates against people is that it doesn't allow for certainly the division of labor and for one's particular talents to become manifest and be fruitful, so that out of charity, even just pure charity, you could give and advance your fellow man or
Mhm.
woman. But on top of that, I think it does a terrible thing of killing our imagination to the point where you, even if you are working toward a governmental job, you're sort of locked into there, and you work and you aim toward developing your life in accord with eventually becoming that governmental bureaucrat. And there's nothing outside of that system that seems either attractive or possible. Do you agree that it really kills imagination?
It does. I think it does. And now that you mention this, is well, what I remember growing up, it's the best thing you could do is probably go to law school, which is already being paid for,
Mhm.
graduate and get a good job in the government. That was the equivalent to success.
Wow. Yeah, well, and we feel that here too, because the still unfortunately, because we're not as much as people would like to think and blame, like if Klaus Schwab was correct that all the problems of the world are on us libertarians, like we have this secret power cabal when we're quite the opposite. We don't have enough sway over society to wrench people away from that and start to have them imagine a society. I mean, like, how many times do you and Scott have to? I'm sure it's not in New Hampshire among your free state friends because everyone's nodding, like, yeah, of course we'll be able to build the roads. But even the most simple ideas of libertarianism, of public services, of public goods, arbitration, what would happen with courts or mutual defense societies, volunteer and fraternal organizations. I mean, those things used to be very much American, and they were probably very much Argentinian way back in the 30s. And now, because government squashes our ability to imagine those institutions coming back, we're left with saying, okay, well, it's okay to go ahead and go to law school and be a justice on the Supreme Court. That's probably the highest honor.
Well, and again, I think that the main issue is that when government controls education,
Mm,
that's to them, that's very smart, and for them, because you can raise kids and make them think and shape the way they think how you want. And to me, it was God first and then the state. And the state is in charge of things that nobody else can. There's no entity, no any other private entity or anything that can take care of what the state does. And that's how it was. I was raised to think that way.
mm-hmm. Do you remember the time when you broke away from that line of thinking? Did it
It was
knock the breath
gradual.
out of your lungs, or?
Again, I was probably like the most libertarian kid in my classroom, because I said that foreigners had to pay for education. I wasn't going to pay for it with my taxes. But even
Oh,
then,
how uncharitable. That Bernarda, she's so mean.
I was a heartless person, but at the same time, um, I could not conceive the idea of Argentinians having to pay for their own education. I thought we owe it to them.
Mm,
And it's just how I grew up, and I couldn't see it any other way.
Right.
And then I came to America and I had to work because I had to pay for my tuition to go to school. Nobody paid for it.
Right.
And I'm glad Biden didn't, because I was very upset when they said that they were going to forgive the loans. It would have benefited me, but I don't think that was right.
Right.
Especially not for those kids that decided not to go to school and, put that on them when it's a service that I chose to pay for.
Yeah, it's that Walter Williams quote where he says, "I'll never understand how it's always termed to be generous when you're stealing from someone else and giving to another, but it's heartless when you're trying to keep what you've worked for or what you've earned." Yeah. So yeah, that's just the pervasive anti-entrepreneurial, anti-business, anti-freedom environment in which we live.
And then the thing is, because people say, or what they claim is like, oh, but if you don't have the means, then you're never going to make it. And that's not true, because when the state stays away from things, they tend to be cheaper. So, people have more options and you can actually pay for it. And even if you don't are rich, because I wasn't rich and I had to work, I was an au pair when I came. I barely had any money.
Yeah.
And I had to work for what I did, and it was possible. So I'm not saying it was easy, but it was possible. It was
Yeah.
doable.
Did you have any bratty kids when you were an au pair?
I love the kids I had. They were awesome. Yeah,
That's great.
the difficult part were the parents. The kids were awesome.
The parents were
It's hard to live with your boss.
Yeah, that's
Your kids,
oh
but you're
gosh.
not. I was 19 at the time, 19, 20. So they will give me a curfew, but I was an employee, not the people. It was just difficult.
Yeah, that's rough. It, yeah. Oh my gosh, I could only imagine. Well, luckily you don't have a curfew now, do you?
I don't.
Okay.
That's what I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, great. So, before we depart, I just wanted to say thank you so much. You really helped me to understand the situation on the ground, and I have even a newfound appreciation for Milei, who I've come to learn more about and appreciate more thanks to the information and analysis you provided. Do you have any kind of final thoughts about what I know you're very hopeful for Argentina, and what would be sort of what we might term the best outcome, even in the proximate or near future?
I just hope that Milei has the support that he needs. I think his ideas are great. I'm surprised he's been in office for 4 weeks and he's done more work than the last president we had in 4 years.
Yeah.
But again, it's not going to be something that happens overnight, and something that I'm worried about of seeing is if, they handed the country in such a horrible state that I'm afraid that if he doesn't have, or the time that he has is not enough to show some results, that people may take away the support, thinking, oh, he didn't do anything, but that's not true.
Right.
He's doing everything that he can, and he's doing things right. It's just going to take a lot of effort.
That's excellent. And well, he does have a flair for the dramatic, like you said. And I suppose that the thing that I most admire about him is the way he was able to combine populism with a thoroughly anarcho-capitalistic and libertarian message. And there's, as you know, there's big debate here as to whether he's for real or not. But here's the thing, in a way, that's ancillary. It's the fact that his messaging and the message itself, the way he delivered it, but also what he delivered ended up winning and securing, at least for a time, we can try our stuff out. We don't have a place where we could try our stuff out.
Yeah.
The stuff of freedom.
And it was a combination of factors, because I was surprised to see how many people, especially the youth, do support his ideas, because some of them do understand it. I do think, though, the vast majority of people that voted for him just voted for a change, and he was, not necessarily they know what libertarianism is, or anarcho-capitalism really means, which is what he truly believes in, but just the fact that he got the opportunity I do hope that they give him the chance.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Next time, I hope that I can call on you again if something major goes down in Argentina. And I'm gonna say Bernarda knows all the answers. She's got it all. She's got the connections.
Well, hopefully whatever happens is good. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so too. And well, even if it's good, bad, in between, you're gonna be my source. So, and I really appreciate your time so much. And please tell Scott I said hi.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye, Bernarda.
Yeah, bye-bye. Bye. Take care.
Okay, guys, we want to thank Bernarda for joining us. I'm talking to you like you're here with me, but you're not. In the absence of Charlie, though, we can't go 2 weeks without Meanwhile in Oak Park. So here we go. This is the segment that everybody's been pining for. It's
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
all right. Well, I just got one story from Oak Park, referenced in these two articles here. Of course, for whatever reason, my YouTube's all screwed up. I chose a new computer to use because the other one's on the fritz. So these are all backwards, which is just fantastic. I might be able to edit and flip the video, but who knows at this point. So the story that's really stuck out to me as I took a look and glance at the Oak Park Wednesday Journal was this story. I would show it to you. In fact, I hope I can share screen here. Let me see. Screen, yeah, share. Okay. Well, that's just gonna share. Yeah. All right. Now I think I got it arranged here. And shit if I don't. All right. Well, now I feel like I'm letting everybody down, but you see this story right here. It is entitled Kinslahger hosts drink event you can drive home from. How nice. So Kinslahger, which is a local brewery on Roosevelt Road in Oak Park, across the street from Berwyn. Well, sure enough, they had a drink event that you can drive from, featuring, and this is an article by Richied Sanders Weir, because every Oak Park journalist has to have that hyphenated name and an accent, to be sure. So this is all about how Kinslahger, this absolute cuck bitch of a brewery and bar, which I've been to, I have to admit, but I was there before 2020, and that is absolutely essential to the story, why it piqued my interest. First of all, why would you feature this? Looks like this guy is an absolute sociopath. I mean, why would you put him on the cover? But anyway, or on the first page. So the story goes is that sure enough, you have a brewery that wants to serve non-alcoholic options. And it reads that the owner, Keith Huizinga, put the event together for a couple of reasons. This was on New Year's Eve, I guess. The brewery doesn't make non-alcoholic beverages. Shocker. But there are always non-alcohol options served in the tap room. Huizinga thought that throwing this event might help him identify options to serve in the future. Another reason is pure curiosity. He says, I really like beer. It's a good trade if you own a brewery, but I manage my alcohol intake carefully. Oh, God. In the past, that's meant switching to water or some other boring beverage. That limitation of choice is changing rapidly. There are many flavorful and interesting non-alcoholic options that feel less like a compromise. Okay. I don't know about you, but any brewer who talks like this, it's like going into a restaurant with a skinny chef or a barber that has hair all over his face. Come on. Talk about the product that is the hallmark of your profession, and that's brewing. Ugh. So then, of course, you have the assorted cuck and simp Oak Parkers who are going in. Tasters Monique and Jorge Sullivan have been exploring non-alcoholic drinks for a while, but say they are always on the search for more and better options. The, in quote, Entitled Art Juicy IPA really tastes like a hoppy beer, Monique said. It's something she'd be happy to relax with after a hard day's work. Okay. If there's anything that smacks Oak Park, in fact, we might have the opportunity to have a referendum or a plebiscite on what should be the official drink of Oak Park. I'm just going to put it out there. It's got to be the Untitled Art Juicy IPA, of course, without any alcohol in it. This is inspired to this event by Dry January, which has to be the worst idea for a month ever, as if we need more teetotalers judging those who would like to imbibe alcoholic beverages. So, for many, Dry January has become a New Year's resolution or experiment. Experts say that having a plan and alternatives close at hand will help see one through the month. As long as you have bitch breweries like this, you'll have a place to go too. All the drinks offered at Kinslahger's event were the result of a de-alcoholizing process. Seems to me to be a waste. There are three principal ways of taking an alcoholic drink and reducing the overall alcohol content: filtering, cooking, and stopping fermentation, and just pouring it out, which is what I would do if I was presented with one of these beverages, as they're called. The article concludes by saying, one other benefit of non-alcoholic beverages is the calorie count. We got to watch our calories, after all. Many that we tasted were as low as 25 calories per can. The highest I saw was only 70 calories, a benefit for what might be your other New Year's resolution. Always so cute, right? So why even go through that? Well, I have a distinctive hate for Kinslahger, as it turns out, because, and I think it's a rightly justified hate of Kinslahger, and in large part, it's because as late as 2021 and then into 2022, as I was going down Roosevelt Road, trying to pass by and avoid Oak Park, but sometimes it's unavoidable given Chicago traffic, I actually looked and kind of glanced at, well, what's that old Kinslahger up to, that bar? And sure enough, there was a gigantic sign, both in the window and then one of those sidewalk displays, that said, if you're unvaccinated, you're not welcome. Segregation. Very good. Segregation exclusion for those who dared to not give in to the pressure of taking a genetic serum that is ultimately disastrous for your health. Yeah. And boy, talk about Kinslahger really buying into the pharmaceutical promises and industry. Yeah. So I look back, and sure enough, without a lot of research or effort having to take place, look back and said, oh, August 17th, 2021. Want a beer? Here's the article from the Oak Leaves, or the Wednesday Journal. Want a beer? Take a shot first. They're so punny. So punny. Want a beer? Take a shot first. The article reads from Melissa Elsmo. Folks looking to belly up to the bar are not strangers to showing identification before imbibing. But now, in addition to checking IDs for proof of age, staff at beer shop, Kinslahger Brewing, pretty much every prominent Oak Park bar, and even Fitzgerald's are requiring vax passes and confirmation that one has received at least the updated vaccine dosage. The owner of the beer shop said, and his name's Tony Campaglia, I am not a scientist or a disease expert. Well, that's a relief. Not that that would stop you from making outrageous claims about the efficacy of a vaccine or mRNA shot, but I do watch what's going on. They're observant, these bar owners. An increasing number of groups are coming to the same decision. It just happens to be all the groups that they were talking with at the time. And you'll love this too. The next paragraph reads, on July 27th, the San Francisco Bar Owner Alliance, because after all, if Oak Park aspires to anything, it's to be mini San Francisco. Maybe without the human feces on the ground, but baby steps. A local industry group, this Bar Owner Alliance, recommended that all local bars check for proof of vaccination before allowing guests in. On Monday, August 15th of 2021, New York City became the first government in the United States to ban, actually there's a typo here, to ban unvaccinated people from indoor, we all remember that, indoor restaurants, gyms, and music venues. 15 Chicago music venues have instituted a no shot, no show policy, and the city of Chicago has its own growing list of restaurants requiring proof of vaccination, including Koval Distillery, Giant, Beat Kitchen, and Empty Bottle. Those used to be clubs where you could actually hear some rebellious, sometimes punk acts. But as we know from Green Day, being punk in 2023 means that you're an absolute bitch for every headline that Joe Biden or Karine Jean-Pierre or Nancy Pelosi or, and they don't even get this one, Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham put out. A quote from Campaglia further. I feel like we are ahead of what will become a trend in Oak Park. Boy, you said that. Talk about Nostradamus here, Tony Campaglia. I am doing my best to balance all these complexities, and things seem to be moving in the direction of checking vaccine status. Okay, discrimination. All right, let's move on. In addition to dealing with some online ire, the beer shop also saw an approximately 20% drop in revenue on the weekend following the announcement. Some called them fascists. They were the minority, though, of course, right? They're clear, as Campagno is going to hand the shop over to new owners, this couple, Jack Dengel and Danielle Dengel. Well, they're all on board. They were all on board too, and I'm sure they are still on board. At the time of this podcast, I did not check if they're still checking vaccine cards, and who's really even carrying around their vaccine cards except to hang them in the window for virtue signaling outside of Lake Street. All right. Just days before Beer Shop announced its vaccine requirement, our friend Keith Huizinga, owner of Kinslahger Brewery, made a similar decision for customers looking to enjoy a beer in his brewery's tasting room. In quote from Huizinga, dear Keith, we are closed for 15 months. This guy is closed for 15 months, either through, I'm sure, somewhat compulsory, but then voluntarily for 15 months at the height of the pandemic. The height of the pandemic was 15 months. So much for 2 weeks to stop the spread. 15 months at the height of the pandemic. And since reopening, we have been staying on top of the Delta variant. One might wonder how a brewer in Oak Park is able to stay on top of a Delta variant. But the previous humility of the Campaglia guy who said he wasn't a virologist and epidemiologist, well, that escapes dear Keith here. He's staying on top of it. These breakthrough infections and the potential for spreading are just too ominous. We contemplated closing again. This guy who's, unless he's just swimming like Scrooge McDuck in money, has had his livelihood ripped from him, and then is just saying like the old what was the Animal House line? Thank you, sir. May I have another? Thank you, Oak Park government and the state of Illinois for closing my business. And I'm just going to go along with it and double down, maybe triple down. He said, we contemplated closing again, but that seemed too drastic. That's too drastic. They have a handle on the Delta variant, or they did after all. The next best thing was limiting the population at Kinslahger to those who have been vaccinated. But I'm confused. If, again, they were all vaccinated, what's the danger of having an unvaccinated person there? Huizinga is clear that life is not risk-free, but acknowledges COVID-related health risks are far less serious among the fully vaccinated. Oh, Keith, yeah, I think you have to go back to get your doctorate or MA or do your final exams in epidemiology, because as it turns out, none of that is true. The decision to require proof of vaccination strikes a proper balance and feels like the responsible choice to the brewery owner. Of course, he says, there were about 3% of people calling us fascists. God bless those 3%. Mind you, I did not call in because I just don't care about Kinslahger Brewery. But 3% were calling us fascists, but we were never going to change those minds anyway. Again, at the time of this podcast, there's no word as to whether Mr. Huizinga giving the mountain of evidence that this was a COVID pandemic and PSYOP, government PSYOP, and the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in human history, particularly in the United States and the West, whether he's been able to change his mind, because he's, after all, elevated and enlightened. Like Campaglia and the Dengels, Huizinga is convinced more businesses will take this approach to keep their customers and employees safe, not if they want to stay in business. Though Huizinga and Campaglia have not spoken, owners of both businesses intend to keep the policy in place long term and are hopeful people who have been hesitant to come out for a beer will feel comfortable visiting their establishments. And then there was a little addendum, as there are with all awful articles, not a correction, an addendum. Fitzgerald's joins in the vaccination proof policy. Just a month or week later that this was added. Fitzgerald's, the iconic nightclub on Roosevelt Road, place where a lot of musical acts play, on Monday joined the escalating number of live music venues, restaurants, and bars requiring either proof of COVID-19 vaccination or an up-to-date negative COVID test to gain admission to the club. From Will Duncan, the owner of Fitzgerald's, this is the best. Masks, in quote, masks are required for staff, and we doggedly beg patrons to wear masks as well. The future of the live music industry depends on kicking COVID's ass, Duncan said. What a rebel. Buying into every propaganda piece from the state, buying into every faux scientific assertion from the military, scientific, industrial class, pharmaceutical class, that he could still, with much audacity, say that he's the rebel and they're going to kick COVID's ass by giving in to every dictate of the state. Well, that tends not to work, as we well know. So that was...
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
All right, good stuff. I hope everyone enjoyed Bernarda's guest appearance. She was fantastic in informing me about things that are happening on the ground. Oftentimes you can't trust the newspaper reports, as we've come to know and learn, and stories even from independent journalists are to be questioned, and we are allowed to be skeptical of those as well. But I keep on being sort of, and Charlie can make fun of me when we reconvene, fanboy of Milei. Let's see if these, as we would attest and assert, these ideas of freedom work. Viva la libertad, carajo. Take care until next time.